Well, I hope you enjoyed the film. Thank you. Thank you. Just wanted to briefly give you some background on the production of the film. The film was produced, I started the research in 1998. The film was broadcast nationally on CBC in November of 2001. That's why I look so young in the film. I remember showing the film to a bunch of students in the school, and after the film, this student came up to me and says, "Was that your son in the movie?" I said, "No, that was me a long time ago." The diary was the inspiration for the film. Now, I had never known that my great uncle had a diary until his son, Lorne White, who you saw in the film, came to me one day and said, "You know, my father wrote a diary. Would you like to read it?" And I said, Sure, I'd like to read it. And when I read it, it just blew me away, because he wrote everything that he saw when he was serving in France with this black battalion. And being a Baptist minister, he had this wonderful command of the English language. All those words that you heard me say in the film were his words. He had this ability to transport you back in time by painting these beautiful images with these poetic and eloquent words. And I was so enthralled when I read the diary. So after I read the diary, I went to my cousin Lorne and I said, "Lorne," I said, "did your dad write any other diaries?" And he said, "No. This is the only diary he ever wrote in his life." And I thought about that. I said, well, why did he do that? Why would he take that time in his life to write this diary? And I said, it's probably because he wanted somebody to know what was happening. And it was then that I decided, you know what? I think this diary landed in my hands for a reason. Here I am, a filmmaker, and having the ability to tell stories on film. I said, I think this was a sign for me to do something. So I started raising money. Now, film is, as you know, is the most expensive medium in which to tell stories. And it takes a lot of money to produce a film. And I started raising the money for the film. You didn't see the full credits, but on the end of credits, we recognized all the people who sponsored the film, put money into it, the Department of National Defense, Veteran Affairs, a whole bunch of organizations who put money into the film. Originally, when I went to them, they all said no. Because they didn't want the story to come out. And it took me a good 2 years to raise the money, which I thought would be so easy to do. But it wasn't. And finally, I went to these people and I said, listen, it's not my objective to embarrass anybody. I just want to show a film about a story, an amazing story that most Canadians don't know. I want to tell a story about these African Canadian men who fought, bled, and died for their country, who served in the First World War, that not too many Canadians know about. And that was the reason. And eventually, after I made some phone calls to some influential politicians in Ottawa, people started to come aboard. And now the DND, Veteran Affairs, is very proud of the film and have helped me sponsor the film, particularly during Black History Month. And I'm very happy to hear that the Premier of Alberta officially last year recognized, the government, the legislature recognized February as Black History Month officially last year, which is great, because this country is so rich with so many important stories. This country was built by many hands of different colors. And we all have some amazing stories to tell. The making of this film was an emotional journey. It was a spiritual journey for me. Because it took so long to raise the money and get it done, I would walk the pavement, fly to Ottawa, fly to Nova Scotia, trying to raise money, and I'd come back home, dead beat, down, depressed. And my wife would look at me and she said, "Why don't you give it up? Stop, it's killing you." And I said, I can't. Something is pushing me. Something is driving me to tell this story. I think my great uncle wants me to tell his story. And all through the research and the running around raising money, things would happen. Things would start to happen. Things would fall in my lap for no reason. And I realized that somebody up there was helping me. And I'm not a religious person. I'm not a spiritual person. But I have to acknowledge that, you know, I would be reading the diary and looking at a soldier's particular story, and I'd want to find out more information about that soldier. And I'd research and look, and I couldn't find anything. And then the following week, I went to Ottawa to attend a function that I didn't really want to go, but I went. And this gentleman came up to me and he said, "Oh, Anthony, I want you to meet somebody." And he introduced me to this guy. And he said, "Anthony's making a film about the Black Battalion." And the gentleman says, "Oh, I had an uncle in the Black Battalion. His name was so-and-so. It was the name I was looking for." And this happened all through the film. The other thing is the Anne-Marie connection. My cousin Lorne has passed away. But he would have went to his grave not knowing the connection that he had to Anne-Marie. When I read the diary, all through my great uncle's diary, he mentioned this Dr. Dan Murray. Dan Murray and I went to Paris to see a Charlie Chaplin movie. Dr. Murray and I went to pick wildflowers together. Dr. Murray and I went for hot chocolate. So finally, I asked Calvin Ruck, who wrote The Black Battalion, who did so much research, and who knew everything about the Black Battalion. I asked Calvin Ruck, I said, "Calvin," I said, "who is this Dr. Murray that my great uncle keeps talking about?" He said, "Oh, that's Anne-Marie's grandfather." I said, "Oh." So I called my cousin Lorne, because I knew that he was friends with Anne-Marie for years and years and years. And as a matter of fact, they were so close, Anne-Marie had her 21st birthday in my cousin Lorne's basement of his house. So I called Lorne and I said, "Lorne," I said, "do you think Anne-Marie would like to do an interview for my film?" And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, you know, because of her grandfather." He said, "Who's her grandfather?" I looked at him and I realized he didn't know. And I said, "Lorne," I said, "Dr. Murray, that's Anne-Marie's grandfather." He almost died. He flew to Toronto the next day to meet Anne-Marie, and we set up this surprise. We didn't tell him he was going to Anne-Marie's house. That's why you saw that it's but a little surprise meeting. But these were the type of things that I realized that the film had to be done, because they would have gone on with their lives not knowing that they had this special connection. And I think that's the message that the film has left on so many people. I just want to talk about my own family connection to this story. This is a picture of my great uncle, William White. He was born in Kings County, Virginia in 1874, and he came to Canada in 1900 to attend Acadia University in Nova Scotia. And he was the only second black to be accepted by that university. He went on to become a minister, become a minister of the Cornwallis Street Baptist Church, where he served for 17 years. They talked about his sermons. You have to also understand that a Baptist minister, a black Baptist minister at that time, fought for his congregation, fought for his community. William White was a social activist. Nova Scotia at that time was extremely racist. It was a segregated society. That was one of the reasons why the battalion was an all-black battalion, because there was such an uproar of not allowing black soldiers to join. And there was so much pressure, spearheaded by my great uncle, who wrote letters to the Prime Minister, Robert Borden, and got a whole bunch of people to force the government to change their attitude. So when the Canadian government finally gave in, they said, okay, we'll allow them to join. But they had a dilemma. The Canadian society was segregated. Well, where are these black soldiers going to sleep? They can't sleep in the same barracks as the white soldiers. So they made them a segregated unit, and they made it a labor battalion. And that was one of the reasons why it was an all-black battalion. As you heard in the film, he married Isadora, whose last name was White. And she was related to my grandmother, whose name was Alice White. Now, my grandmother was an accomplished musician and music teacher, and she had 5 daughters, and she taught her 5 daughters how to play musical instruments. And my mother was a singer. You'll see my mother standing on the edge with my father, who was dressed to the nines. He was courting her at that time, so he came to the house looking very sharp. I come from a very interesting parentage. As you see, my mother was a black Canadian, and my father was a white Jamaican. So I grew up listening to a black mother speak like every other Canadian, and this white father who had this thick Jamaican accent. So, I would be at a wedding with my parents, and I'd say to my friends, oh, this is my mother. And my mother would say, oh, hi, it's such a lovely wedding. I'm so happy to be here. And this is my dad. And my father would say, it's a pleasure to meet you, young fella. It's a wonderful fete you have. And they'd look at my parents and go, wait a minute. But growing up in that environment, was very unique and very special for us. Music was a strong influence in our family. As I mentioned, my mother was a singer. There's a picture of my mom when she was 18. There's a picture of my mom with some of her sisters in Halifax. That's where I was born, in Halifax. This is a picture of my brothers and sisters who sang together as a musical group called the Sherwoods. That was a shot taken when we were doing a musical documentary I produced at CBC called Music of Family Tradition. And as you can see, we're all shades of colors. This is a picture of Izzy and some of the children. They had 13 children, as you heard in the film. And one of them, music also played a very important part of their family. Lauren's sister was Portia White. How many of you have ever heard of Portia White? Portia White was Canada's first famous black opera singer. And that was my aunt, and that was William White's daughter. And she became an international star. Traveled all around the world. Jack White, who you saw in the film with the beard, he was a musician, but he was also the first black to run for federal office in the Canadian government. So very, very famous family. William White was appointed chaplain of the battalion. He was also a commissioned officer, and he was given the rank of captain. And he was the first black officer and the only black chaplain in the entire British Armed Forces during the First World War. The only one. When I showed this film at the Imperial War Museum in London, England, when they heard that, they couldn't believe it, that the only black chaplain and first black officer in the British Armed Forces was a Canadian. Yeah. Let me just go back. This was a picture that we saw in the film. This was Christmas Eve, or Christmas Day, 1917, in the barracks. And my great uncle was the only black officer in the officers' mess. And he talked about how hard it was for him to be accepted. And he wrote everything that he was feeling, and he didn't hold back in the diary. You could feel the pain, the hurt, the torment that he was going through, being a captain and an officer, and yet seeing what was happening to his soldiers, and trying to maintain his dignity as an officer in the army, and not allowing his feelings to put his rank in jeopardy. And you could feel that dilemma throughout the pages that he wrote. The diary that you saw in the film was the actual diary of William White, we used in the film. And you saw that the months of the year were in French. And it's interesting. They landed in France in May 17th, 1917. Yet the first entry into the diary is not until October 1917. And it made me think, and I said, this was probably what happened. He landed in France with this black battalion, saw what was happening to the soldiers, and probably said, I better write this down, because nobody's going to believe it. And this was a rare document, the diary, because it was a first-hand account of what was happening to these soldiers that nobody knew about. This stuff is not in military records, folks. You know, the army wasn't going to tell you that they were, giving the black soldiers, they weren't giving them socks, they weren't giving them underwear, they worked them day and night, they didn't take care of them when they're sick. You look up military records and you'll see, okay, this black soldier died of so-and-so, and this so-and-so date, and joined that. So this was a valuable document, because it was telling us what was happening to these soldiers. And when I realized that what was happening with this diary, it made me understand the importance of doing the film and what was happening to these, as you saw, these young soldiers. I mean, the diary was filled of the emotions that my great uncle was going through. You know, when we read war letters from young Canadian soldiers, barely out of their teens, when we read these war letters and we see the hurt, and we see the fear, and we see the trying to understand why they are there, and witnessing the horrors of war, these young men unprepared. When we read these letters, it gives us an insight of what those men were going through. And he wouldn't have been able to go through it without the help of Dan Murray, and that was a remarkable friendship. Two men from two different worlds, but yet shared the same belief in humanity. And that was the other element that struck me, and the other theme that I wanted to carry in my film. It was important for me not to produce a film of just hate and anger. It was important for me to produce a film of cooperation and understanding and love, because this is the only way that we'll conquer and become together. The only way. This is a photo of Colonel Dan Sutherland, who was the commanding officer of the No. 2 Construction Battalion. And as the grandson, Bruce Murray, mentioned in the film, Dan Murray, his grandfather, and Dan Sutherland were good friends. They came from the same town, Spring Hill, Nova Scotia. And it was Dan Sutherland who asked Dan Murray to join the No. 2 Construction Battalion. This is a photo of the No. 2 Construction Battalion lined up. The No. 2 Construction Battalion is given the title as Canada's one and only all-black battalion. And by definition, that is true. But it was not the first all-black military unit formed in this country. In 1860, in Victoria, BC, Canada or British Columbia was under attack or being threatened under attack by the United States, who wanted to occupy San Juan Island. And the residents of Victoria at that time, there's a large black community in Victoria at that time, decided to form a military defense unit to protect the British Columbia. And so British Columbia's first defensive military regiment was an all-black military unit formed in Victoria, who were mostly members of the fire brigade. And this unit was supported by then the governor of British Columbia, the first governor of British Columbia, who was Sir James Douglas, who was often referred to as the father of British Columbia. He was the first governor, who was also half black. His mother was from the Caribbean, and his father was of British descent. This is probably the most famous photo of the black battalions used in so many promos of promoting the No. 2 Construction Battalion. It is the photo that was used by Canada Post in 2016 for the 100th anniversary of the No. 2 Construction Battalion. And they made a stamp in 2016, which was the 100th anniversary of the formation of the No. 2 Construction Battalion. And has anybody seen the stamp, this stamp? Yeah, good. Here is a badge, which is also being on display. There's a great replica on display in the lobby at the No. 2 Construction Battalion exhibit. So if you have a chance to go and take a look at that exhibit, you'll see a replica of the badge there. The soldiers in the No. 2 Construction Battalion came from all across Canada. From the United States, as I mentioned in the film, I think there were about 160 Americans in the film, in the battalion, and also from the Caribbean, because they needed the numbers to qualify as a battalion. They needed at least 700 soldiers, which they didn't have those numbers in Nova Scotia. So they recruited from all across Canada and United States and the Caribbean. This is a picture of one of the soldiers. I believe he's from the Caribbean. Another one of the soldiers this is a photo that was given to me by Don Carty, whose father was in the No. 2. This is a picture of the Downey brothers, if I remember correctly. A picture of Mike Jackson, who died in the film. This is an actual picture of John Mansfield, who died, who the doctors refused to take care of, and they didn't think that they thought he was faking. And those words that I used in the film, now the doctors know he is not faking. Those were the words of my great uncle. But that's the actual picture of John Mansfield. This is a picture of Private Russell Miller from London, Ontario. So the ones, John Mansfield was from Nova Scotia, Russell Miller was from London. They came from all across Canada. Does anybody know who that is? John Ware. Probably this province and this country is one of their most famous cowboys. There is a Calgary connection to this story. If you go in the exhibit in the lobby, you'll see a photo of two of John Ware's sons, Arthur and William, who were members of the No. 2 Construction Battalion. And I don't know which one is Arthur and which one is William, but they joined here in Calgary. And so there were a number of soldiers in the No. 2 Construction Battalion who were from Alberta. This is the stamp. Canada Post issued a stamp in 2012 for Black History Month. They do it every year to honor an African Canadian hero or heroine. And this was the stamp they honored John Ware with in 2012. Here is a photo of Private Columbus Bowen, who was from Paxson, Alberta, I believe. And there's another photo of him with another soldier, I think, in the exhibit. This is a list of soldiers from Alberta. And they're in red, and highlighted in red are the soldiers who were from Calgary, Alberta. So you'll see there 4 soldiers who were from Calgary, who enlisted in Calgary, who joined the No. 2 Construction Battalion. But you'll see, yes, Private Columbus Bowen was from Paxson, Alberta. You'll notice that from this list, there are a number of soldiers from Athabasca Landing. There's about 4 or 5 from Athabasca Landing. Does anybody know why? Amber Valley. In about, I think, in the early 1900s, Canada wanted to expand the development of out west, and they were offering free land in Alberta. And there were in about 1903 or 1910, about 300 blacks from Oklahoma came up to settle in northern Alberta, and they settled in the Athabasca Valley. And there's an NFB film that was produced many years ago called Amber Valley. And Amber Valley was an area where there was a predominantly black settlement. So Alberta has a rich history of early black settlements, and most of them were in the Athabasca region. In 2016, for the 100th anniversary of the formation of the No. 2, I decided to write a play and produce a play to commemorate that 100th anniversary. And the play was called The Color of Courage. And I produced it. It had its world premiere in Nova Scotia at Alderney Landing Theatre. And it was a wonderful experience. I took a story out of the diary and embellished it and made this story for this play. And it was very well received. This is a scene from that play with some of the actors. A photo of me with the actors. They wanted to kill me because I rehearsed them so hard. They came to me one day, "Sir, shouldn't we have guns?" I said, "No." You were a construction battalion. This was a photo that was featured in the film. It's one of the bands at the No. 2 Construction Battalion. One of the one of the people who was interviewed in the film, his father is playing the tuba, standing up there. Albert Carty is his name. His son is Don Carty, who was interviewed in the film. But I show you this picture for a reason. Honor Before Glory has been shown practically, not all over the world, but it's certainly been shown in many places. It's been shown all across Canada, in many of the military bases across Canada, schools, universities. I've shown the film in the United States extensively. It won a prize at the Hollywood Black Film Festival. I showed the film at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. It was shown in London. It was shown in Berlin. It's shown in Paris. And it's won awards. But the most proud thing I am of this film, it's how it's been able to connect people. I got an email several years ago, maybe about 7 years ago, from this woman in France. And she said, my grandson actually, is looking for who his real grandfather was. And I told him that his real grandfather was a black soldier that his grandmother had an affair with, and she wanted to track him down. And I said, well, can you give me some information? She said she knew he was with the Black Battalion. And she said, I can't remember too much. This was the mother talking, so the grandmother had passed away by then. She said, all I can remember was that he played a saxophone in the band. So I said, I have a picture. Let me look at the picture. So I looked at the picture and I said, okay, there's a guy with a saxophone. So I knew that Don Carty's father, who was playing holding the tuba, was in that band. So I called Don and I said, Don, I said, there's a photo of your dad and the band, and there's a guy kneeling down with a saxophone. Do you know who that is? Oh yeah, that's George Stewart. He lived upstairs to us. And this is the kind of thing that was going on with this film. So I said, really? I said, so you know him well? He said, yeah, we know him very well. So one thing led to another, and I had to be very delicate because George Stewart had a family. And he had one daughter that was still alive. She was hospitalized. But anyway, we managed to connect these two families. And that is the overall theme of this film. I've shown this film all across Canada, all across the United States. And when I've shown it all across Canada, after a screening, inevitably, somebody comes up to me and says, you know what? I saw my grandfather in this film. You know what? I saw my uncle in this film, and I didn't know he was a part of that battalion. Thank you for bringing this story. And to me, that is the biggest reward as a filmmaker, to be able to do that, is to connect people and inform them about an important story. I'm very proud of this film. Even though it's dated, it still holds up, and people are still enthralled and impressed by it. And I didn't do it alone. I had help from somebody very special. So I just want to end by encouraging you. You know, I speak at a lot of schools. I speak at a lot of schools, a lot of young people during Black History Month. And I always tell students the same thing. I said, listen, Black History Month is not to boast about anybody's culture or history or anything like that. I said, I think Black History Month is to inspire or encourage you to look into your own family background and investigate how your grandparents and great-grandparents came to this country, and what they went through, what they did, and what they contributed to building this country. This country was built by hands, many hands of different colors, from different religions and backgrounds and ethnic groups. And I encourage them to do the same thing, because this is how I discovered this great story about my great uncle. And we all have amazing family stories to tell. I loved being here. I can't tell you what a thrill it's been for me to be here in Calgary in this wonderful museum. Thank you, Doug, for inviting me. Thank you, Melissa. And hope to see you soon. Thank you.
That's wonderful.